So I get it just as much as anybody. I really do. I understand it. The Sabres are terrible. They're way worse than we had ever thought that they'd be. They have completely underachieved. And that has to be a statement that's right out of the gate. One that's well known right out of the gate. That the Sabres they've mightily underachieved. But in saying that, I do have to recognize that it is a season, a full-on season, one that starts in October of 2018 and will probably ultimately end in April of 2019. So there's peaks and flows to a season, as everybody knows. There's games you win, there's games you lose, there's hot streaks, there's cold streaks, and Buffalo had a 10-game win streak. So at one point, for a very short window of opportunity, they were able to maximize that opportunity, and they were able to completely shock the NHL and run the NHL for those 10 games. Winning 10 games, most of them were very close. We know that. And once that 10-game win streak was over, there's been a lot of circumstances after that have given myself and Sabres fans reasons to pause. But these circumstances are now being completely misconstrued by fans that I know, fans that I read, or writers that I read, things that I hear. I really think that the Sabres fans are in the clouds on this one. If you really think about it, I'm saying this not to insult anyone or be a jerk or anything like that. I'm offering a different perspective on what most Sabres fans deem to be reality. At one point, the Sabres did win 10 straight games. At one point, the Sabres did look very, very good. So here we are, mediocrity at its finest, and we're here to say that our head coach should be fired, that our head coach needs to go, that our head coach has got to go. Okay, if that's your opinion, if that's your take, okay, I will accept that. But I will also throw you a response as if that is actually what is going to take place, without it actually taking place quite yet. Let's just say, hypothetically, that the Buffalo Sabres decide to fire Phil Housley at the end of this season. That would be Jack Eichel's third head coach in his 5 seasons in the NHL. That would be the laughing stock of the National Hockey League. We've been the National Hockey League's laughing stock once, twice, 3 times, 4 times before. We cannot go back there. We cannot do it. We need continuity. How does any fan expect the Buffalo Sabres to get better when they constantly have changed head coaches? Since the longtime head coach of the team, Lindy Ruff, was let go, Ron Rolston, Ted Nolan, Dan Bilesma, Phil Housley. That's 4 different head coaches in a span of 7-8 years. That's not good. It is not good. And I'm not saying that Phil Housley is the grandioso, Scotty Bowman. I'm not saying that he's that. I'm not saying that he's even earned the right to even be talked about as a legitimate head coach. But what I am saying is, and I'm saying that because he's only been the coach for 2 years, I can't judge Phil Housley's coaching career as a head coach in a 2-year span. But what I can do is judge the fact that he was an assistant on a franchise in a system that was working very well. He was a major influence on that system recently. This is not a Rex Ryan case. This is not, Rex Ryan went to 2 AFC championships back-to-back in 2010, 2011, and 6-7 years later, he's the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. Or 5-6 years later, he's the head coach of the Buffalo Bills. There's no gaps. This was a hire this is a hire that featured an assistant that had his scheme working full well, firing on all cylinders en route to a Stanley Cup appearance. a Stanley Cup appearance. That is the ultimate goal for the Sabres is to get back to the Stanley Cup. Whatever happens at that point is really up to them. But that's half the battle, is getting there in the National Hockey League. It's the toughest championship to compete for in any pro sport, the Stanley Cup championship. And getting there is everything. If Phil Housley's system worked for one team to get there recently, why can't it work this time? And we'll ask ourselves some questions. Is the reasons why the system is not working, is it due to the fact that Housley is coaching it inefficiently? That can't be it, because he's coached it efficiently with certain players before. So the question there is, do we have the players to fit the system? No, we do not. And I have said this since day one of this season. I have said this time and time again. I have said specifically that there are veterans on this team that have no business being here. They might not have any business being on the Sabres. They might not have any business being in the NHL in the next couple years. They might even be in the NHL in the next couple years. So, yes, I'm not happy about the way this Sabres season has gone. I thought for sure, with 100%, without a shadow of a doubt, they'd make the playoffs. Now knowing that they're probably not gonna, yeah, that does stink. That is not fun. The playoff drought continues. A new playoff drought in Buffalo continues. I get it. But doing this constant finger pointing and trying to figure out who's the problem, when we know what the problem is, and the person that we're pointing the finger at is not what we all know to be the problem. We know the problem to be the lack of depth on this roster, the lack of secondary scoring, the lack of third and fourth line scoring, somewhat second line scoring as well. Yes, it's the coach's job to put the players in the right position, but it's also the GM's job to put the right players on the ice. And that's not my indictment of Jason Bottrill. That is me saying that this is going to take a little bit longer than what we thought as far as the rebuilding process. And if Sabres fans are sick of hearing that, ask yourselves this. If you want Phil Housley fired, if you want Phil Housley to go, you'd be firing Phil Housley in a season in which they were the number one team at one point in the National Hockey League. So is Phil Housley a victim of his own success? If so, ask yourself again why he should be fired in this particular season. Year 2 as the head coach of the Buffalo Sabres. This is a former Hall of Famer. This is a guy that wore the blue and gold. This is a guy that was an assistant on the Nashville Predators and was a fantastic assistant for that franchise, so much so that it parlayed him to get a head coaching job playing for his former franchise, playing for the franchise that he embarked his NHL career in. So I'm not at that point. I'm really not. If people want to call out Housley and say that he needs to be fired, they should stick to it. They shouldn't flip-flop. They shouldn't hop on, hop off, do this rigmarole, whatever you want to call it. Because if that's the case, if you'll support him when he succeeds, and if you don't want to support him when he fails, does that mean he should be fired? There was success this season. Should he be fired in a season where there was success? No, he should not. Next year, obviously, is a massive year. And as I said, there are a lot of circumstances this season that led to Buffalo not quite having some things left to be desired. Patrick Berglund was one of them. And I really think there's a lot more to that story than what was said. Most of it we'll probably never know. But really, that was not good. That was Avante Davis 2.0 for Buffalo sports. And didn't look good. But Berglund was a guy that they also acquired in the Ryan O'Reilly trade. So you have a few pieces of this trade that come through the Tage Thompsons of the world, but then you got the Patrick Berglunds of the world. So you have one piece of that trade that decided he didn't want to play for the Sabres while playing for the Sabres. It's not a good look. And I know that there are guys in the minor leagues, I know that there's guys that I've talked to in the minor leagues that know that there is so much talent in Rochester, and they're wondering why it has not been called up. Meanwhile, at one point on this team, there's been 9 defensemen. I know one thing. I know that the Sabres have needed an offensive boost for quite a while. As I said myself, they've needed secondary line scoring, third line scoring, and fourth line scoring. They've needed scoring from everyone outside of Eichel and Skinner, outside of Reinhart. They haven't gotten it. In spades they have, but few, not that often. Not that often. So, wouldn't you think that it'd be time to go through the minor league ranks and maybe call up a Nylander? I think that would be a fair assessment. Whether they feel he's ready or quote-unquote ready, all that, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They need a huge boost. Does Nylander give it to him? You don't know, but you need to find out. You need to see what he's got at the National Hockey League level. The more he sits in the minors, the longer it's going to take for him to get in the NHL, because that's literally what has happened. He's stayed in the minors. He's just been stuck in the minors and has not been called up. I want to see him in the NHL. I don't care if they think he's ready or not. Maybe that's part of the problem too. The misevaluation as far as who's ready to play in the NHL or who's not ready to play in the NHL. I would say, to me, that is the number one problem with the Buffalo Sabres. The misevaluation of the roster, the overvaluing of the veterans, the relying on the veterans for quality minutes late in their careers. I know Zach Bogosian had a goal tonight, but man, he's looked bad in stretches of the season. Marco Scandella, bad. Really bad. Vladimir Sabatka, bad. Really bad. So there's some dead weight on this team that's got to go. Whether that's Phil Housley's fault or not, I would highly debate that at any point with anyone in the midst of this hockey season. But for anyone to insinuate that just because somebody didn't play something, which means they shouldn't have an opinion on it, that's pretty asinine. Anybody with 2 eyes can see what the real problem is with the Sabres. Anyone with 4 eyes can see the real problem and then some. So I'm definitely thinking that if they fire Phil Housley and they hire who they feel is the right coach, I'm having a real hard time buying what the Sabres would be selling. Wouldn't you?